Hi, welcome to episode 304 of the Corner of Knit and Tea. My name is Laura. I'm also known as Fluffyk on Twitter and Instagram, Fluffyk on Ravelry. I blog over at thecornerofknitandtea.com, and that's where this episode and every episode show notes will be. I have an Etsy shop where I sell my handspun yarns and my knitting patterns, and that's also the Corner of Knit and Tea. And we do have a Ravelry group, although I'm not currently using it very much because there are some concerns about some folks getting on Ravelry. So hi, how are you? It is Monday, November 16th, and it is sunny-ish here and windy, and it has been a good crafting week. So I hope that you are doing well. We are coming up on the holidays. This is the last week before American Thanksgiving week, and I'm looking forward to taking a few days out of the office and just concentrating on knitting and relaxing. We are not going anywhere. The United States, unfortunately, is in the middle of a huge coronavirus upsurge, and I know even our own area hospitals are having trouble keeping up. So we are going to do our part and stay home. It will be almost the first time in 42 years that I have not had Thanksgiving with my family. We did time shift the year my niece Roxy was born because she was due Thanksgiving week. So we actually held it the first couple weeks in December instead. But this year we are not traveling. My parents are in California. I have not seen them since last year at this time. And my sister is in Chicago, and I have not seen her and the kids since last year at this time. Unfortunately, this year has been a bit of a loss in those terms, but we are trying to stay healthy and do our part, and so we'll be staying home. Honestly, my biggest conundrum right now is whether I cook an entire meal and then we have lots and lots of leftovers, or whether I just kind of say and don't do much of anything. I don't know what we'll do. Thanksgiving has always been the big holiday in my family because I am Jewish, and so in my family we don't celebrate Christmas. Both my sister and I married men who were not Jewish, so we celebrate Christmas with our in-laws. So it's kind of bittersweet this year. We will talk on Skype or on Zoom, and we'll be on our own a little bit. That said, I am looking forward to a few days without work and to just relax. I really haven't taken any vacation time this year because we haven't gone anywhere. So it will be nice to just take a few days off from work. And I am thankful for all that we have this year. Despite everything that is going on, we and our families are healthy, and we have continued to stay employed this year, and I am grateful for all of those things. So I'm also grateful for you. Thank you for joining me today if you're new here. I hope you'll find a reason to hit the subscribe button or come back. And if you're joining me again, welcome back. I have lots and lots of knitting to talk about, but I will answer one more question. These questions that I have been answering over the last few weeks are from episode 300, which was a milestone for me, and I asked what you'd like to see more of or what you'd like me to talk about, and there were quite a few questions on there, and so I'm trying to sort of work my way through them. One of the questions was as a designer, which I only consider myself sort of a baby designer. I have about 10 patterns, I think, on Ravelry, and some of them were free on blogs or are free through newsletter signups, so I only have a few that are actually like paid for patterns. But one of the questions that I get asked, I've been asked a couple times, is where I get my inspiration. And I will tell you that in general, part of the reason that I don't consider myself a designer is because it's not that I don't get inspired, but in general, I am inspired to take things I see that I like and modify them, but I am not necessarily what I would classify as a visionary in terms of coming up with all of my own ideas. So in general, I hardly ever knit a pattern. Well, I shouldn't say that. When knitting for myself, I hardly ever knit a pattern as written. I do a lot of sample knitting, so I do knit lots of patterns as written. But when knitting for myself, I like to make modifications, adjust for the fit, add elements that I like, and so that ends up being more of my knitting than my designing. When asked where my ideas come from, it kind of just depends. Many of my designs I have been offered a quantity of yarn to either for free to review or as yarn support, and so I have sat with that yarn and swatched a little bit and thought about what I wanted to make with it and come up with an idea. Then again, sometimes I come up with ideas of things I would like to do, or I see images or things in nature that inspire me to create a design based on them. So what I do when I'm looking for design ideas or when I have design ideas, I spend some time on Pinterest sometimes looking for images. I create often private boards, sort of mood boards for myself, where I collect lots of different images, either still photos or stitch patterns or yarns or colors or themes, just anything that makes me think about the design, things that I might like to incorporate into a pattern, things that I want to come back to later. And so usually I create those boards, and then when I am ready to sit down and sort of swatch and design, I look at those, I see if there are stitches that I want to try. I often peruse my Barbara Walker stitch dictionaries. Barbara Walker has a treasury of knitting patterns. There are 4 books. And usually I find what I'm looking for in the second, which is basically a huge stitch Bible of all kinds of stitches. So I spend a lot of time looking at those. And then I try not to look at what my fellow designers are doing, but if there are elements or things that I have discovered in their patterns that are clever, sometimes I think about how I would work something like that into my pattern, or refer out to them when I am, particularly if it's a technique that, say, they've done a video on or discussed on their blog, sort of refer out to them for how to use that technique, which creates a nicer finish or makes things easier. So I know that's not really a cohesive way to talk about how I design. Like I said, sometimes I start with the yarn, sometimes I start with stitch patterns, sometimes I start with some kind of inspiration. I will say that in general, when I listen to other designers talk, I am reminded of why I am not a designer. Recently I took a class at, I think it was Vogue Knitting Live with Bristol Ivy, and she talks about all the inspiration that she finds in garments and photographs and buildings and all kinds of things around her, and about her curiosity on how to translate those into knitting fabric. And I will say that that is not something that I think about. I don't think of myself as a person who is eager and curious to try all kinds of new things. I sort of dislike ripping my knitting, which is a huge element of being a designer. So I consider my designing sort of part and parcel of other things that I do. And when I feel inspired, I put something out, and otherwise I let the visionary designers share their creations with you. So let's get into today's podcast. Today I am drinking Downton Abbey Christmas tea. This is one of my favorites. It's just kind of a spiced tea, perfect for the holidays. It's with mulling spices. So it is black tea, cinnamon, natural flavors, cloves, licorice root, and apple bits. So that is a favorite of mine, and I'm drinking it in one of my favorite mugs because this is one of those ceramic enamel mugs, and it stays hot for a long time. It's the Roastery, which is our local coffee house. So that is delicious, and I know it's not Christmas yet, but I will take a little holiday spirit wherever I can get some. So, my first finished object for the week is one that I am wearing. This is the Elfie by Astrid Schramm, and of course, as I said before, it's a good segue into how I like to modify things. Elfie is a t-shirt or a top without sleeves, and it is worked from the top down. It calls for 2 colors, and the colors sort of transition between each other. As one color has thinner stripes, the other color has thicker stripes, and so it transitions from color A on top down to color B on bottom through a series of stripes. I went ahead and decided to do it in all one color. The Elfie pattern calls for fingering weight, but I used sport weight, and then I added sleeves and edgings to mine. So I added the collar up top, I added long sleeves, which I actually ended up doing as a just I used the full amount of the stitches, which is kind of snug up top and a little bit looser down at the bottom. And then when I got to the cuff, I went ahead and decreased a little bit and then did a 2x2 rib on the cuff. And then the body is A-line, and I also added a little bit at the hem. If I get around to taking pictures today, I will try and put a photo of the finished sweater on the mannequin in at the end of this podcast so you can see the full thing. The yarns I used are Spun Right Round in her Sport Weight, which is, I believe, an 85-15 blend of merino, superwash merino, and nylon. And then the edging in the dark purple colorway is Kim Dye's yarn. It is her Tartlet Sport in the Plumstruck colorway. And this colorway is called the Walkers. It is a gray, and it has speckled yarns. It is speckled with purple and green, and it was kind of a toxic holiday colorway. And it is called the Walkers, kind of after zombies. It was a holiday colorway for Halloween quite a few years ago. I am really, really pleased with the way this fits and the way it looks and the way it feels. I blocked it. I finished it last week and blocked it. And today's my first day wearing it, and it's nice and cozy and warm, and I think it's flattering, and I'm just super, super happy with it. I ended up knitting the smallest size because I was using a sport weight yarn, and if you have any questions about the project, you can check out my Ravelry page for my details, or if you cannot use Ravelry, you are welcome to email me if you have any questions about it. I am also super pleased because this is not a NaKniSweMo sweater in the sense that it is not eligible for this year's NaKniSweMo, but I did finish it in November, and the yarn was my NaKniSweMo sweater in 2017. I knit a whole sweater, I ripped it out because I hated it, and now it has been repurposed into a gorgeous sweater. I used approximately 3 of the 4 skeins that I had of the Walkers, and I used maybe between a quarter and a half skein of the Kim Dye's yarn. So that is the details on this project, and I am super, super happy with it. That is the only finished object I have to show you this week, but I am pleased to have cranked that out, and I have quite a bit of progress on all of my other projects. So, my current NaKniSweMo sweater is a pattern called Mayuga by Joji Locatelli, and I am knitting it as a sample for Zen Yarn Garden. I'm knitting it in their Superfine DK. The pattern calls for Malabrigo Rios, but Zen Yarn Garden's Superfine DK knits up at approximately the same gauge. Zen's worsted is actually a little bit more towards Aran, so we decided to go with the Superfine DK in the pattern. The pattern for Mayuga is a top-down raglan sleeved collar, so it's worked all in one piece, and my goal for this week was to finish the body, which I have. So it is looking vaguely sweater-like. Like I said, it is a cardigan. It's got this really great textured stitch pattern that I have showed you, and I am knitting it in a gray, which is called Silver Moon, and as you can see, it pays to alternate skeins because they are kind of different. I don't think it shows up as much stripy in person as it does on here, but you can see that there are definitely lighter and darker skeins. The one nice thing is that the elongated stitches that are slipped and then worked create kind of break up the pattern a little bit, and particularly with the colors. So this is a somewhat longer cardigan. The body was 17 inches plus then some broken rib hem, which I finished yesterday, and now I have 2 sleeves and the button band, and then we are done. So I have a little bit of concern. I am going to run close on yarn, which seems to be par for the course for me lately, but I'm keeping my fingers crossed that I have enough. I think I'm going to steam block the body tonight to make sure that the length is appropriate, to make sure that it doesn't grow too much, because it is superwash. It might grow some, and if so, I may even be able to take a little bit out of the body and put it back into the sleeves. So we'll just have to see how that goes. I think I might do the button band next and then divide what's left for the sleeves and hope that I come out okay. Worst case, I will ask for another ball of yarn since this is a sample, but hopefully I will just have enough to eke out the size. I am knitting the 39 1/4 size, which I believe is the medium, and I picked that based on the amount of yarn that they sent me for the sample. So this one actually will fit me, and I did try it on, and it is a nice fit so far. So that is what I will be working on the next couple weeks. I hope that by the time I see you again, I have the button band finished, one sleeve, and maybe started on the second sleeve. I really have high hopes to finish this one soon. So, yeah. That's my NaKniSweMo sweater, and I should say that as of cast off last night, I have 39,700 stitches in this sweater, and I calculated, and I will easily hit 50 and go over once I have the sleeves. So that will be a 50,000 stitch sweater in the month of November for my NaKniSweMo. Unfortunately, I don't get to keep this one. This one goes back to Zen Yarn Garden. They do pay me for my sample knitting, but hopefully I'll be able to do another sweater for myself sometime soon. So while this is not a finished object, it is a goal reached for the week, and I'm super pleased with that. And yeah, I might even go back and knit this one for myself. The pattern shows it in a variegated yarn. I think it would be lovely in a variegated yarn if you have skeins of those hanging around in your stash. The elongated stitch really breaks up, the textured stitch here really breaks up those variegated colorways. But it's also gorgeous in this pattern. So that is number one on the needles. Next on the needles, I talked about picking up some other things and finishing them off this week, and I have come close, but not quite. One of the things that I picked up was my Hope and Feathers shawl. That is a pattern by Lyrical Knits, who is Mary Annarella. She released it this spring or early summer, I believe, and it is a pattern that calls for 2 skeins of fingering weight yarn, any 2 skeins, and it is done in a, it starts at a point and moves through an asymmetrical triangle, and it has mixed sections of a broken garter ridge and then some mosaic slip stitch knitting. So it's got these great sections of the mosaic where the color is worked together, and then sections where the plain colors are worked. I will say, this is the second time I have knit this shawl. I knit it first on the needles called for. Okay, so let's talk. Let's talk about swatching. I did not swatch for this shawl because usually generally I do not swatch for shawls because I sort of figure that if the size comes out a little bigger or a little smaller, it doesn't bother me too much. I will say that shawls do come with recommended gauges, and that it is important to get close to the recommended gauge if you want to be able to use the amount of yarn that the pattern calls for. So, you may use more or less yarn depending on your gauge. For instance, if your gauge is larger, you will use more yarn. If your gauge is larger, meaning fewer stitches per inch, you will be using more yarn than the pattern calls for. And if your gauge is smaller, meaning fewer stitches per inch, you will likely use less yarn than the pattern calls for. I started this shawl without swatching, which is my fault, on the size needles called for in the pattern, and I realized a good chunk of the way through that I was not going to have enough of either skein to finish the pattern. So I went ahead and ripped it and went down a needle size and reknit the shawl. Again, I didn't do a gauge swatch. My fault. And I reknit the shawl, and I am getting roughly the called for gauge now in the shawl. However, I have run out of both colors of the yarn. So if you are planning to knit this pattern, may I recommend that the yardages are very, very tight, particularly if the yarn that you are using, the pattern calls for 2 skeins of fingering weight yarn, and she specifies it can be any 2 skeins of fingering weight yarn. The fiber content doesn't matter, the ply structure doesn't matter, and what I might say is that if you are using skeins that come in 400 yards or less, you are likely to be very, very tight on your yardage. I am using Zen Yarn Garden Superfine Fingering. I am using their Nightshades, which is the yarn that has one ply of black and the other shades are dyed. That is in the Peach Blossom colorway, which is these greens, oranges, and yellows, really kind of springy peas and carrots and corn. And then I am using a skein of their Natural, which is their regular Superfine Fingering base, and that is, both skeins are 400 yards to 100 grams. And so that is the put up, and I have run out of both. At this point, I have broken into a second skein of the Peach Blossom, I needed to do that partway through the fourth and final slip stitch section, so I got maybe halfway through on the skein that I had and then had to break into another skein. And I have now gotten through 6 of the final 9 sections in the natural colorway, and I am out of natural. Now I do have another skein in the house, so I will be able to go ahead and break into that and finish this. But like I said, this one is super, super tight on yardage. I do know that Zen Yarn Garden is going to be offering kits. I have discussed these shortages with them, and I'm sure that they will make appropriate arrangements on how to offer the kits with enough yardage to knit, but I will say really caution on this one, particularly if you are going from stash. Like I said, if your skeins have less than 400 yards, you are going to be really close. I have watched on Ravelry, there are between 12 and 16 projects of this shawl on Ravelry, and at least half of them have used far more than 800 yards, which is technically what the pattern calls for. I also read one woman who used 860 yards, and she ran out as well and had to abbreviate the final section. So, word to the wise. I like to share those with you. So this is Hope and Feathers. It is a lovely shawl pattern. I really do like the way it is coming out. I hope to finish it this week. I just need to break into another ball, and I did not have time to wind that. I think I hit this on Saturday, and I just have not had time to wind anything else up because I was working on the sweater yesterday. So unfortunately, I did not quite reach the goal of finishing this one this week, but like I said, I did get through the second half of the slip stitch section and about 2/3 of the final section, so I have just a few more repeats of this section and then a bind off in the main color. So that should be done in the next week or so, and then hopefully I can move that on to photography, and they'll be able to produce the kits for that. So sorry, the last little bit that I have is rolling around on the floor. So the other goal that I had set for myself this week, I also did not quite reach it, but I'm getting close. So I had knit this sock for Miles a couple weeks ago. This is out of a crazy Zauberball, and Miles is my nephew. He is 4, and so I am knitting him some socks for Christmas and fall, and just because it's that time of year. And I am all the way through the I did the cuff and I did the slip stitch heel flap, and I am all the way through the gusset on this sock. So tonight I hope to finish the foot. That's my plan for tonight, is to start on my sleeve and finish the foot here, and then I will have a pair of socks for Miles. They are fraternal because it is a crazy Zauberball, and so the patterns do not repeat a ton. I guess maybe they repeat at some point through the ball, but I was not going to try and figure out where I was in the ball and how to make that happen. I just decided that these will be fraternal socks. These are not super soft, but I love the German sock wools because they wear like absolute iron, and my hope is that he'll outgrow them before he wears through the socks. So far that has happened with the kids because they outgrow things really quickly. So I am about halfway, or I should say 3/4 of the way to a pair of socks, and this is the final pair of socks that I need to do for the kids for the holidays, so I am really stoked that that is just about done. So those are my knits for this week. So I will focus on the sleeves on the sweater, and I'm going to focus on getting these done. And then I have a few more things that I need to do for the holidays, and I think I'm probably going to take those up this week. Roxy needs a pair of mittens, and if you have been watching me for a while, you know how much I love mittens. But she needs a pair of mittens to go with her Harry Potter scarf and the hat that I made her for this season. So I am going to sit down and make myself do those mittens this week. And then the only thing that I have to do between now and Christmas is I need to knit my brother-in-law a pair of Christmas socks. Everybody else's socks are done and ready to go. And so I just need to knit my brother-in-law a pair. He has rather large feet. And since I'm getting started a little late in the process, and because he's a little, I don't want to say a little picky, he's a little particular about his clothes. He knows what he likes, and he likes it. So I decided to go ahead and make him a pair of house socks rather than regular socks. because he has been working from home, and I feel like maybe they'll be good in slippers over the winter, and I just don't know whether he would actually wear hand knit socks in shoes. The other issue that I have is I don't want, he does his own laundry. He and my sister have their, I don't know. He does his own laundry, and I want to be sure that the socks don't shrink or felt, and so I needed to have something that was machine washable and easy. So I am going to be knitting him the Barley socks, which are a pattern, the Rye socks, which are a pattern by Tin Can Knits. It is from their Simple Knits collection, and it is, I believe, a free pattern. It is a pair of socks in DK weight, and it's got garter ridge detailing on a portion of the foot. So I am going to be knitting him a pair of those. Like I said, it calls for DK weight yarn, and I ordered some Barocco Vintage DK, which is a 50-50 wool and acrylic blend. It wears really, really well, and I think they'll be good for socks that he can throw in the washing machine and just kind of wash and dry and wear. And I am waiting for that to come. I placed the order for that at the end of last week, so that should show up towards the end of this week, and I will cast those on. I do have some other sample knits to get into, and I have to tell you, I'm kind of dying to knit something for myself. I'm not sure what yet, but I am sort of dying to do a sweater or a shawl or some kind of cast on. So my choices are, I could find a sweater pattern for the yarn that I was going to use for my NaKniSweMo sweater, which is Barrett Wool Co. Wisconsin Woolen Spun. I'm thinking about maybe doing a Weekender Light pullover that is by Drea Renee Knits, Andrea Mowry, and you may remember that I tried to knit that in some other yarn that I had, but I thought I was going to run out of that. I have plenty to do the Weekender Light in my size, and the Wisconsin Woolen Spun is a great yarn. I believe the pattern calls for Brooklyn Tweed Loft, which is a woolen spun fingering weight, so I think the Wisconsin Woolen Spun fingering weight that I have would be a great match for that. So I might do that one. Or I showed you I have the Rowan kind of capelet called Plume, designed by Martin Story. And so I think maybe I'm going to cast on one of the two of those. But like I said, I still have some more samples coming, and who knows? So I might have a new knit for you next week, if not surely the week after, because my plan is to cast on something new over Thanksgiving weekend, something just for myself that I can kind of enjoy. So I may not have a new cast on for you next Monday, but I will have one the following Monday. So I think that's almost it. Spinning wise, I went ahead and spun the second skein of How Ghastly, which is Hello Yarn Fiber I showed you a couple weeks ago on the podcast, and I finished the first skein and showed that off. The second skein, the singles, are all finished, and I think I'm going to try and apply that tonight. Gosh, I have lots of things I have bookmarked for this evening. We'll have to see if I can get to all of them. I'm going to try and apply that up in the next day or two, and I did have someone who asked for those. So I went ahead and pulled out another braid to spin, and this is some deep, well-marinated stash. This is from Wool Gatherings, who is on Etsy, and if you haven't visited their site on Etsy, they produce some really, really lovely fiber. This has been in the stash since June, July 2012. If you are a member of the Crazy, Twisted, and Arbitrary spinning group on Ravelry, they over the years have done spin-alongs with dyers. Everyone posts photos for inspiration. The group votes on their favorites, and then the dyer dyes colorways inspired by these photos. And I picked up a couple braids of this. I actually spun up one of these a long time ago and sold it, and I think this one will also be for the shop. But as I said, this is from June, July 2012. It was inspired by a photo of a starling. I believe the theme for this was birds. It is 85% Polworth, 15% silk. So like I said, this is Wool Gatherings Starling. I don't know if she still sells this colorway. Some of the ones that she has done for the CTA group, Crazy, Twisted, and Arbitrary, she has turned into shop colorways that she has kept open. So this is Starling. It is kind of a rainbowy. It's got reds and oranges and blues and purples. And when I spun it last time, I spun it as I believe I spun it straight through and then just chain plied, so it was beautifully rainbowy. I have not decided exactly how I will spin it this time. Probably the same. I think I don't want to do sort of a barber pole with this. The real question is I could split it, if I split it carefully, I could split it into two, and then it could be basically a sock set so that you could knit yourself matching socks. So I haven't decided exactly what I'm going to do with it yet, but that is going to be the spin for this week, and that will go up in the shop when I'm done with it. It is a beautiful, beautiful braid, and I love Polworth silk, so that will be kind of a great spin for this week. So we are at half an hour, which I feel like is just the perfect length for my podcasts. I feel like I can tell you all kinds of things and show you all kinds of things, but then adjourn and let you move on with your day. So I hope you are doing well. I hope if you are coming up on a holiday week in the US that you are staying home and enjoying your family. I wish for you peaceful crafting, health for you and your family and friends, and hopefully a slightly less stressful week ahead. Until I see you next time, I will say happy knitting, happy spinning, happy sipping, and I'll see you next week. Bye.